Catherine Larson could feel the whispers follow her like a shadow as she walked down the dusty main street of Willow Creek. At 22, she had already been branded with the cruelest of small-town verdicts, too plain to ever attract a husband. The year was 1876, and in this frontier town nestled in the Colorado Territory, a woman's worth was still measured by her beauty and her ability to secure a match. "Morning, Miss Larson," called Mrs. Patterson from the general store porch, her voice carrying a hint of pity that made Catherine wince. "Good morning," Catherine replied, keeping her chin up despite the burning in her cheeks. She clutched her satchel of books tighter to her chest, a shield against the pitying glances. As the town schoolteacher, she had purpose, even dignity, but according to the gossips, she lacked the one thing that truly mattered. She was not beautiful. Her mousy brown hair refused to hold a curl, her face was dotted with freckles across an unremarkable nose, and her figure was slender to the point of boyishness. Not like the buxom daughters of the wealthy ranchers who turned heads whenever they promenaded through town. Catherine hurried toward the schoolhouse at the edge of town, taking comfort in the thought of her students. They, at least, didn't judge her by her appearance. To them, she was simply Miss Larson, who taught them their letters and numbers and occasionally slipped them peppermint candies when they mastered a difficult lesson. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the commotion by the livery stable until she nearly walked into it. A crowd had gathered around a string of magnificent horses, and at the center of attention stood a man Catherine had never seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and sun-bronzed, with a weather-beaten cowboy hat pushed back on his head, revealing a shock of sandy blonde hair. His rugged face bore the marks of someone who lived under the open sky, with laugh lines around his eyes and a strong, square jaw covered in stubble. Catherine paused, curiosity getting the better of her. Willow Creek didn't often see strangers, especially ones who commanded such attention. "That's right, folks," the stranger was saying, his voice deep and warm like well-aged whiskey. 20 head of the finest quarter horses this side of the Mississippi. Just brought 'em up from Texas for Mr. Thornton's ranch. Garrett Whitaker, a voice called from the crowd. "Heard tell you were the best horse trainer in 3 states, the stranger Garrett grinned modestly. "I just speak their language is all." Catherine found herself lingering, watching as Garrett fielded questions and showcased his horses. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with boasting. She was so absorbed in observation that she didn't notice when his gaze shifted and landed directly on her. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a heartbeat, Catherine forgot to breathe. His eyes were the color of a summer sky, clear and piercing. He nodded to her, the barest acknowledgement, but it sent a flush of warmth spreading across her cheeks. Flustered, she ducked her head and hurried away toward the schoolhouse, berating herself for her foolishness. Men like that handsome, capable men didn't look twice at women like her. That was simply the way of the world. The school bell was just about to ring when Catherine heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. She turned to find Garrett Whitaker bringing his horse to a halt nearby, those blue eyes studying her with interest. "Morning, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Catherine replied, hating how breathless she sounded. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Whitaker?" A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "News travels fast in small towns." "Yes, madam. I was wondering if you might point me toward a place to get a decent meal. Been on the trail for days, and trail rations get mighty tiresome." "Mrs. Henderson's boarding house serves breakfast until 9, Catherine said. "Just down the street, the white house with blue shutters." "Much obliged, Miss Larson, Catherine Larson. I'm the schoolteacher here." Garrett's smile broadened, genuine and warm. "A noble profession, Miss Larson, teaching the next generation. My ma was a schoolteacher back in Kansas before she passed." Before Catherine could respond, the school bell rang and children began appearing in the distance, racing toward the schoolhouse. "I should go," she said, nodding toward her approaching students, "of course. Thank you for your help, Miss Larson." He touched his hat again. Perhaps our paths will cross again. As he rode away, Catherine couldn't help but watch him go, a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest, but she quickly dismissed it. A man like Garrett Whitaker wouldn't be in Willow Creek long, and even if he were, he'd have his pick of the town beauties. She wasn't foolish enough to hope for more. Little did she know how wrong she was. Catherine was erasing the day's arithmetic lessons from the blackboard when a knock at the schoolhouse door startled her. School had ended 2 hours ago, and she hadn't expected any visitors. "Come in," she called, dusting chalk from her hands. To her surprise, Garrett Whitaker stepped through the door, hat in his hands. His hair was damp, and he'd changed into a clean shirt, though he still had the unmistakable look of a man who lived his life outdoors. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "What brings you to the schoolhouse?" "Hope I'm not intruding, Miss Larson," he said, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I saw the light and thought you might still be here." "Just finishing up for the day," she explained, gesturing to the blackboard. "Did you find Mrs. Henderson's boarding house all right?" "I did, thank you. Best flapjacks I've had in months." He took a few steps into the room, looking around at the neat rows of desks, the maps on the walls, the small bookshelf in the corner. "Nice schoolhouse. Reminds me of the one I attended as a boy." "You're a long way from Kansas," Catherine observed, curiosity getting the better of her. "Life takes you places you never expect," he replied with a slight shrug. "After the war, I couldn't settle. Worked cattle drives, then found I had a way with horses. Been doing that ever since, moving where the work takes me. And now it's brought you to Willow Creek. Seems so." He met her eyes again, that direct gaze making her heart skip. "Mr. Thornton hired me to train horses for his ranch and set up a proper breeding program. Could be here a spell." Catherine nodded, unsure what to say next. There was an expectant silence, as if he were waiting for something. Finally, Garrett cleared his throat. "Truth is, Miss Larson, I came by to ask if you might join me for supper at the hotel dining room this evening, as a thank you for your help this morning." Catherine stared at him, certain she had misheard. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Yes, madam, unless you're otherwise engaged." "No, she stopped, gathering her composure. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Whitaker, but entirely unnecessary. I only pointed you toward breakfast." "Sometimes kindness deserves recognition," he replied simply. "Besides, I'm new in town. Could use some company that isn't just talking horses." Catherine hesitated. Dining with a man she'd just met would certainly set tongues wagging in Willow Creek. Then again, no one would believe a man like Garrett Whitaker had romantic intentions toward her. They'd assume he was merely being polite to the spinster schoolteacher. "Very well," she said at last. "Thank you for the invitation." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Wonderful. Shall I call for you at 6? Where do you reside?" "The yellow house behind the church." "I rent rooms from Widow Parker." "I'll be there at 6 sharp." He placed his hat back on his head. "Looking forward to it, Miss Larson." After he left, Catherine sat at her desk, heart racing. It was just a thank-you meal, she reminded herself sternly, nothing more. But as she gathered her things to head home, she couldn't help wondering what she might wear. Catherine Larson, dining with Garrett Whitaker, Widow Parker exclaimed when Catherine mentioned her plans. "Well, isn't that something?" "It's not what you're thinking," Catherine said quickly, searching through her modest wardrobe. "He's new in town and was simply being polite." The widow, a kind-hearted woman in her 60s with silver hair and knowing eyes, made a non-committal noise. "The blue dress," she said, pointing to Catherine's best garment. "It brings out your eyes." Catherine fingered the blue calico dress, one of the few she owned that wasn't strictly practical. She'd sewn it herself last winter, adding delicate white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "Don't you go putting notions in my head, Mrs. Parker," Catherine warned, though she took the blue dress from its hook. "Wouldn't dream of it, dear," the widow replied with a smile that suggested otherwise. "But a handsome young man calling on you deserves your best effort, regardless of intentions." By the time the mantel clock struck 6, Catherine was ready, her brown hair arranged in a simple but neat twist, her blue dress freshly pressed. She'd even added a dab of rose water behind her ears, a Christmas gift from her students that she rarely used. The knock at the door came precisely at 6. Mrs. Parker answered it, exchanging pleasantries with Garrett while Catherine gathered her shawl and reticule. When she appeared in the parlor, she was gratified to see a look of appreciation cross Garrett's face. "Miss Larson," he said, "you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker." She tried to sound composed, though her heart was fluttering like a trapped bird. Garrett offered his arm, and they walked the short distance to the hotel, the spring evening pleasant around them. People on the street turned to look, surprise evident on their faces at seeing the plain schoolteacher on the arm of the handsome newcomer. "I believe we're causing a stir," Catherine murmured, acutely aware of the eyes following them. "Small towns," Garrett replied with a wry smile. "Been the same everywhere I've been. Folks always curious about what doesn't fit their expectations." The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Willow Creek, with white tablecloths and actual silver cutlery. Most of the town's residents only dined there on special occasions. Catherine couldn't remember the last time she had eaten there. Garrett pulled out her chair with easy courtesy, and for the next 2 hours, Catherine forgot to be self-conscious. He was an excellent conversationalist, sharing stories of his travels across the Western Territories, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching, and drawing her out of her shell with genuine interest. "How did you come to be teaching in Willow Creek?" he asked as they finished their apple pie dessert. "I grew up near Denver," Catherine explained. "My father was a professor at a small college there. He believed in education for women as well as men, so I received more schooling than most girls. When he passed away 3 years ago, I needed to support myself. Teaching seemed the natural choice." "And your mother?" "She died when I was young, just my father and me for most of my life." Catherine sipped her coffee. "What about your family?" A shadow crossed Garrett's face. "Lost my pa to fever when I was 14. Ma held on until I was 18, then her heart gave out. No siblings. Joined the Union Army in '63, served until the end, been on my own since." "The war must have been terrible," Catherine said softly. "Parts I don't care to remember," he agreed. "But it's behind us now. Looking forward is the only way to live." Their conversation was interrupted by the hotel owner approaching their table, a telegram in hand. "Mr. Whitaker, this just came for you." Garrett excused himself to read it, his expression growing serious. When he returned to the table, he looked apologetic. "I'm afraid I need to cut our evening short, Miss Larson. There's been a problem with the horse delivery. Some of the mares broke loose on the way to Thornton's ranch. I need to help round them up." "Of course," Catherine said, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand." He insisted on escorting her home first, despite her protests that she could manage the short walk alone. At her door, he took her hand, his touch sending sparks through her. "I've enjoyed your company tremendously, Miss Larson," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I hope you'll allow me to call on you again." Catherine searched his face for any sign of mockery or pity, finding only genuine warmth. "I would like that," she admitted. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good night, then, and thank you for a pleasant evening." As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she chided herself for the foolish hope blooming in her chest. One dinner didn't mean anything. Garrett was simply being kind to a woman who had helped him. Nothing more. Yet sleep was long in coming, her mind replaying every moment, every smile, every word. For the next week, Catherine saw nothing of Garrett. She heard through town gossip that he and several of Thornton's men had been tracking the escaped horses across difficult territory. She tried to focus on her teaching, to push thoughts of the handsome horse trainer from her mind, but found herself watching the road whenever she walked to and from the schoolhouse. On Friday afternoon, as she was dismissing her students, a familiar figure appeared in the schoolyard, leading a beautiful chestnut mare. The children swarmed around Garrett and the horse, exclaiming in delight as he patiently answered their questions and let them pet the mare's velvety nose. Catherine's heart leapt at the sight of him, sun-bronzed and dusty from the trail, but smiling as he explained to the children how horses communicated with their ears and tails. Only when the last child had reluctantly departed did he approach her, leading the mare. "Miss Larson," he greeted her, the warmth in his voice making her pulse quicken. "Mr. Whitaker, I see you found your missing horses." "All but two," he confirmed. "This lady here was the ringleader, took us all the way to the foothills before we caught up with her." The mare nudged Garrett's shoulder affectionately, making Catherine smile. "She seems fond of you now. We came to an understanding," he said with a grin. "She's got spirit, this one, just needed to know she was respected." He patted the horse's neck. "I've named her Empress." "A fitting name for a lady who led men on a merry chase," Catherine observed. Garrett's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You have a way with words, Miss Larson." He glanced at the schoolhouse, then back at her. "I was wondering if you might like to go riding with me on Sunday afternoon. If you don't have other plans." The invitation was so unexpected that Catherine blinked in surprise. "Riding? I am afraid I'm not much of a horsewoman, Mr. Whitaker." "Perfect opportunity to learn, then," he replied easily. "I promise to find you the gentlest mount at Thornton's ranch." Catherine hesitated. She had ridden occasionally as a girl but hadn't been on a horse in years. "I don't have proper riding clothes. A simple skirt will do fine for a gentle ride, nothing fancy." His expression grew earnest. "I'd very much like to show you some of the countryside I've been exploring. There's a meadow about an hour's ride from town that's carpeted with wildflowers right now. Beautiful spot for a picnic." The thought of spending an afternoon with Garrett was too tempting to resist, despite her misgivings. "In that case, I accept your invitation." His smile was radiant. "Wonderful. I'll come for you around noon on Sunday." As he mounted Empress and rode away, Catherine wondered what she had gotten herself into. And more importantly, why a man like Garrett Whitaker seemed determined to spend time with her. On Sunday morning, Catherine fretted over her appearance more than she had in years. She chose her sturdiest skirt, a sensible brown that wouldn't show dirt, and her cream-colored shirtwaist with the mother-of-pearl buttons. Her hair she braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, practical for riding but still neat. "You look like you're going to a funeral, not a picnic," Mrs. Parker observed critically. "Don't you have anything with a bit of color?" Catherine sighed. "I'm going riding, Mrs. Parker. Fashion is hardly the point." The widow rummaged in her sewing basket and produced a bright yellow ribbon. "Here, at least put this in your hair. A touch of sunshine never hurt anyone." To please the older woman, Catherine allowed her to weave the ribbon through her braid. The effect in the mirror was surprisingly pretty, adding a touch of brightness to her otherwise plain appearance. When Garrett arrived, he was leading two horses Empress and a gentle-looking bay gelding. He himself was dressed simply in clean denim trousers, a blue shirt, and his ever-present hat, but somehow managed to look more handsome than any man had a right to. "Miss Larson," he greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready for an adventure?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, eyeing the bay horse with trepidation. "This is Samson," Garrett said, introducing the gelding. "He's the gentlest soul in Thornton's stables. Practically rocks you to sleep with his smooth gait." With patient hands, Garrett helped Catherine mount, showing her how to gather the reins properly and where to position her feet in the stirrups. His touch was respectful but sure, and Catherine found herself both relieved and slightly disappointed when he stepped back. "Remember, he can sense if you're nervous," Garrett advised as he mounted Empress. "Just breathe easy and trust him to do his job." They set out at a walk, Garrett leading the way out of town and toward the rolling hills beyond. True to his word, Samson moved with a gentle, rocking motion that Catherine found easy to adjust to. As her confidence grew, she relaxed and began to enjoy the sensation of being on horseback, the rhythm of hooves against earth, the spring sunshine on her face. "You're a natural," Garrett observed after they'd been riding for half an hour. Sitting well in the saddle already, Catherine laughed. I think that's more Samson's doing than mine. He's very patient with me. A good match then, Garrett said with a smile, a patient horse for a patient teacher. The countryside was awakening from winter's slumber, with new grass painting the hills emerald green and wildflowers beginning to dot the landscape. As they rode, Garrett pointed out interesting sights: a hawk's nest high in a pine tree, deer tracks crossing a stream, the distant purple shadows of mountains on the horizon. True to his word, after about an hour's ride, they crested a hill to find a meadow spread before them, a tapestry of blues, purples, and yellows where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. "Oh," Catherine exclaimed, the beauty of it catching her by surprise. "It's like something from a painting." Garrett's expression was soft as he watched her reaction. "Thought you might appreciate it. Found it while tracking those mares last week." They dismounted at the edge of the meadow, and Garrett produced a picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of apple cider. He spread a blanket on a patch of grass, and they sat together, the horses grazing contentedly nearby. As they ate, Catherine found herself relaxing completely in his company. There was something so easy, so natural about being with Garrett. He didn't try to impress her with grand statements or false compliments, just shared his observations and listened to hers with genuine interest. "May I ask you something, Mr. Whitaker?" Catherine said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "I think after sharing a picnic you might call me Garrett," he suggested with a smile. "And yes, ask away. Why did you invite me today, truthfully?" She met his eyes directly, needing to understand. He considered her question, taking his time before answering. "Because I enjoy your company, Catherine. Because when I talk to you, I feel like I'm talking to someone real, not just hearing what they think I want to hear. There are many women in town who would be happy to ride with you," she pressed. "Prettier women with better prospects." A frown creased his brow. "Is that how you see yourself? As somehow less desirable than other women?" Catherine looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. "It's how the town sees me. Too plain to desire, I've heard them say." Anger flashed across Garrett's face. "People can be cruel without even knowing the damage they do." He reached out, gently turning her face back toward his. "Catherine, listen to me. Beauty isn't just what's on the surface. It's in how you light up when you talk about your students. It's in how you consider your words before speaking. It's in your kindness and your quiet strength." His words warmed something cold inside her, a part that had been frozen by years of judgment and dismissal. "You hardly know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he replied simply. "And I'd like to know more if you'll let me." Before she could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving quickly in their direction. "We should head back," Garrett said regretfully, rising and offering her his hand. "Spring storms can come on fast in these parts." They packed up quickly and mounted, setting off at a faster pace than before. Catherine was surprised to find herself comfortable with the increased speed, Samson responding easily to her guidance. They were still about 30 minutes from town when the storm caught them. The rain came suddenly, fat drops quickly turning into a downpour. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that made both horses dance nervously. "There's an old line shack just over that rise," Garrett called over the storm's noise, pointing ahead. "We can wait it out there." They urged the horses forward, cresting the hill to find a small wooden structure nestled against a stand of pines. By the time they reached it, both were soaked through, water streaming from their hats and clothes. Garrett dismounted quickly, helping Catherine down before leading the horses to the lee side of the cabin, where a crude lean-to offered some shelter. He tied them securely, then guided Catherine to the shack's door. The interior was simple but sound: a dirt floor, a small iron stove in the corner, a rough-hewn table with a bench, and a narrow cot against one wall. It was dry, at least, and out of the wind. Used by the cattlemen during roundup, Garrett explained, moving to the stove where, to Catherine's surprise, kindling and firewood were stacked nearby. They keep these places stocked for emergencies. He quickly built a fire, and soon the small space was filled with warm, flickering light. Catherine stood shivering, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her body. "Here," Garrett said, shrugging out of his jacket and draping it around her shoulders. "It's damp, but it'll help." "Thank you," she murmured, clutching the leather around her. It smelled of him horses and pine and something uniquely Garrett. He found a tin coffee pot and some grounds in a cupboard and set water to boil on the stove. "Storm shouldn't last long," he said, watching the rain lash against the single small window. "But we're better off waiting it out." "Roads will be muddy." Catherine nodded, suddenly acutely aware of their situation. She was alone in a remote cabin with a man she barely knew, yet strangely, she felt no fear. There was something about Garrett that inspired trust, a fundamental decency that showed in his every action. "I'm sorry our picnic was cut short," she said, moving closer to the stove's warmth. "I'm not," he replied with a small smile. "Any time with you is time well spent, Catherine." The simple sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. "Why are you so kind to me?" "Is kindness so rare that you have to question it?" he countered gently. "When it comes from a man like you, directed at a woman like me, yes." Garrett's expression grew serious. "What do you mean, a man like me?" Catherine gestured vaguely. "Handsome, capable. The kind of man who could have any woman he wanted." He was quiet for a moment, tending the fire. "You know, horses are interesting creatures," he said finally. "People are always drawn to the flashy ones, the ones with the striking markings or the high-stepping gait. But a horseman, a true horseman, looks deeper. He looks for heart, for steadiness, for intelligence." He looked up at her, firelight casting shadows across his features. "I've never much cared for flash, Catherine. I care about substance." The coffee began to boil, and he busied himself preparing 2 tin cups, giving her a moment to absorb his words. "Besides," he continued, handing her a steaming cup, "who says I don't find you beautiful? Because I do." Catherine nearly dropped the cup, certain she had misheard. "You don't have to say things like that. I'm not in the habit of saying things I don't mean." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the different shades of blue in his eyes. "I think you're beautiful, Catherine Larson. Not in the way that turns heads when you walk into a saloon, maybe, but in a way that matters more, in a way that lasts." Something in his earnest expression made her believe him, or at least believe that he believed what he was saying. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee spread through her. Outside, the storm was beginning to abate, the thunder more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter. "We should probably head back soon," Garrett said, though he made no move toward the door. "Mrs. Parker will be worried about you." "Yes," Catherine agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell of the moment. They stood there, the small space between them charged with something Catherine had never experienced before, a connection that seemed to transcend the physical, yet was acutely, intensely physical at the same time. Garrett reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "May I kiss you, Catherine?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. In answer, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but deepened as Garrett's arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. Catherine had been kissed before, awkward, fumbling kisses from the son of her father's colleague years ago, but nothing like this. This was a revelation, a communication more eloquent than words. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the first time I saw you," he confessed. "Since you saw me lurking at the edge of the crowd by the livery," Catherine asked, disbelieving. "You weren't lurking," he corrected with a smile. "You were observing, thoughtfully. And yes, since then." The rain had stopped completely now, sunlight beginning to filter through the clouds and through the cabin's small window. "We should go." Catherine said reluctantly. Garrett nodded, though he kept her hand in his as they stepped outside into the fresh, washed air. The world seemed renewed by the storm, colors more vibrant, scents more intense. The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by something new and fragile and promising. At the edge of town, Garrett spoke. "Catherine, I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it." Her heart soared at the words, even as doubt crept in. "People will talk. Let them," he said simply. "Their opinions matter little to me. It's yours I care about." "Then yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I would like that very much." His smile was radiant as they rode into town together, side by side. True to his word, Garrett began to court Catherine with a dedication that soon had the entire town talking. He called on her regularly at Mrs. Parker's, brought flowers to the schoolhouse, and escorted her to church on Sundays. They rode together often, exploring the countryside around Willow Creek, and took walks along the creek in the evenings. Catherine bloomed under his attention like a flower turning toward the sun. She found herself laughing more, standing taller, caring less about the whispers that followed them. For the first time in her life, she began to see herself through someone else's eyes, not as the plain schoolteacher, but as a woman worthy of love and admiration. Garrett, for his part, seemed oblivious to the town's gossip. When asked directly by Thornton why he was courting the schoolteacher instead of one of the rancher's pretty nieces, he replied simply, "Because she's the desire of my life." The phrase spread through town like wildfire, transforming the narrative from one of puzzlement to one of romance. Women who had previously pitied Catherine now regarded her with curiosity and even envy. Men who had overlooked her began to see her in a new light, noticing her quiet intelligence and gentle humor. Summer came to the Colorado territory, bringing long, golden days and warm evenings. Garrett's work at Thornton's ranch was going well, with the breeding program established and several of his trained horses bringing good prices at auction. He began to talk about the future, about buying land of his own, building a home, putting down roots after years of wandering. On a perfect July evening, he took Catherine to their meadow, now in full summer glory. They picnicked as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As they sat side by side watching the sunset, Garrett took her hand. "I've been thinking about what you told me that day in the line shack," he said. "About being too plain to desire." Catherine winced at the memory. "I shouldn't have repeated such gossip." "No, I'm glad you did." He turned to face her fully. "Because it gave me the chance to tell you how wrong they were. And now I want to tell you something else." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Catherine's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires. "Catherine Larson, from the moment I saw you, something in my heart recognized you. Not your face, though I find it beautiful, but your soul, your essence." He took a deep breath. "I've wandered most of my life, never feeling like I belonged anywhere, but with you, I've found my home." Tears blurred Catherine's vision as he continued. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You are the desire of my life, the dream I never knew I had. Will you marry me and make a home with me?" "Yes," Catherine whispered, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Yes, Garrett, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with such tenderness that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why are you crying?" he asked gently, wiping them away with his thumb. "Because I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "Because for so long I believed what they said about me. That I was too plain, too bookish, too undesirable." Garrett cradled her face in his hands. "Listen to me, Catherine. You are everything I've ever wanted, everything I'll ever need. And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again." They were married in September, with the aspen leaves turning gold around them. The entire town attended, many genuinely happy for the couple. Others simply curious to witness the culmination of the unexpected romance that had blossomed among them. Catherine wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Parker had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs and tiny pearl buttons down the back. Her brown hair was adorned with white roses, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers from their meadow. Garrett, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, watched her walk toward him with such naked adoration on his face that several of the town's most hardened skeptics found themselves dabbing at their eyes. "Never seen a man look at a woman quite like that," Mrs. Patterson whispered to her neighbor. "Makes you believe in love all over again." After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers, Catherine overheard one of the young girls asking her mother, "But how did Miss Larson get such a handsome husband? Everyone always said she was too plain." Before the embarrassed mother could hush her daughter, Garrett stepped forward, having heard the question. He knelt to the child's level, his voice gentle but firm. "You know, little miss, people often mistake what's truly beautiful. They look at the wrapping and forget to consider what's inside. Your teacher has the most beautiful heart, the most beautiful mind, and the most beautiful soul of anyone I've ever known. That makes her the most beautiful woman in the world to me." The girl considered this seriously, then nodded. "I think you're right, Mr. Whitaker." "Miss Larson, I mean Mrs. Whitaker, is nice to everyone, even Bobby Jenkins when he's being awful, and she tells the best stories." "Exactly," Garrett agreed with a smile, rising to his feet and taking Catherine's hand. "And that's the kind of beauty that lasts forever." Catherine squeezed his hand, love welling up inside her. "You're going to make me cry again," she whispered. "Happy tears only," he replied, kissing her cheek, "for the rest of our lives." And as they rode away from the church in a wagon decorated with flowers and ribbons, heading toward their new home on the small ranch Garrett had purchased, Catherine knew that she had found something precious beyond measure, a man who saw her truly, loved her completely, and had made her the desire of his life.